Welcome to Careers in Discovery, your window into the world of biotech leaders. On each episode, we interview the industry's leading executives to understand how they built their careers, what they've learned along the way, and the advice they'd give to their younger selves. This time on Careers in Discovery, I'm with Søren Bregenholt, CEO of Alligator Bioscience, a company developing tumour-directed immunotherapies to treat aggressive cancers. Søren and I talked about his career, explored what it really means to be a CEO, why solving problems is your job, and how to strike the balance between hierarchy and creativity in growing biotech companies. Welcome back to Careers in Discovery, and this week I am delighted to be joined by Søren Bregenholt of Alligator Bioscience. Søren, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tom. I think it's going to be fun today.
It is. I'm looking forward to this. There's so much about your career, Søren, that I'm really interested in asking you about. I don't know whether we'll get through all of it, but I think we're gonna have some very, very interesting things to discuss. But let's start by talking about Alligator and the work that you're doing there. So, tumor-directed immunotherapy. Tell us a bit more about that. Tell us a bit more about the work you're doing in cancer.
Yeah, so Alligator is focusing on antibodies drugs in solid tumors, and we are particularly interested in so-called agonistic antibodies, so antibodies that deliver a positive signal on the receptor that they engage. And one of the caveats with that, historically caveats with this kind of antibodies, is that if you push those receptors too aggressively throughout the body, then you get a lot of immune activation, but unfortunately you also get a lot of side effects. So we have designed both monoclonal and latest also bispecific antibodies that direct this immune stimulatory capacity directly in the tumor to give drugs that are efficacious, and they're also pretty safe.
Yes. Yeah, I see. So it's a situation where the therapeutic potential is there and clear, but it's how do you get there without too much side effects, without too much off target?
Exactly. And even in oncology, I think we have come to the realization that first and foremost that combination therapies are the way forward, and there is still a limit. Even though these patients have huge unmet medical need, there is still a limit to how much side effects you can actually tolerate, especially when you start layering molecules on top of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's been incredible progress in cancer treatment over the last 20 years, right?
Yeah.
But the treatment that's available to patients today is still, a lot of it's still quite rough going, isn't it? It's still quite hard to navigate. Especially
in some of the cancers like pancreatic cancer, where we are operating with our lead asset. There is basically only chemotherapy in a couple of different combinations, and they are pretty inefficient, and they're pretty toxic.
Yes.
So you want something that can potentate or add to the effect of the chemotherapy without adding too much adverse events on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And pancreatic cancer, of course, famously aggressive, fast, all those things.
Yeah. It's an ugly disease.
It is. I mean, without giving the secrets away, are you able to say much about what you're seeing in your studies at the moment?
Yeah. We recently announced the data in Lancet Oncology, and basically what we are able to see is that for those patients that actually respond to the treatment, so this is our CD40 monoclonal called mitazalimab, or just mita in sort of daily lingo, on top of the chemotherapy called FOLFIRINOX, which is the harshest of the chemotherapies used in first line. And those patients that respond to the treatment, they actually have their tumor under control approximately twice as long as those patients that are on chemo alone.
Yes.
Which then translates into a significant survival benefit, both on the overall survival, but more pronounced when you're looking at how many patients are alive after, for instance, 18 months of treatment. You see a a doubling from what you normally see with chemotherapy. And we are in a couple of weeks going to release 24 months follow-up data from that phase 2 study. So pretty encouraging data at this point.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And then there's a pipeline forming behind that I've seen as well, and lots going on over there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. And you've spent most of your career, Søren, in and around the Copenhagen region and in biotech companies in that part of the world. And it's an area that geographically I'm particularly interested in because it seems like there's a lot going on, especially the last few years. And of course, as well as having worked for companies there, you've been very involved in the Medicine Valley Alliance until recently. And just really interested in your view on that sort of Copenhagen Lund region and kind of the current state of play in that part of the world.
Yeah. I think we have been fortunate in this region of having pharma present for many years. Initially, you had Astra and AstraZeneca on the Swedish side. When they left the region, fortunately, you had the Danish side taking over with Novo Nordisk, which is on everybody's lips these days.
Yes.
But they've been around for more than 100 years.
Yeah.
You have Lundbeck in the CNS space. You have Leo. You have Bavarian Nordic. You have a lot of companies. And I think the great thing here is that you have in the region sort of the full ecosystem from very good universities. You have the early biotech companies. You have some scale-ups. You have the pharma companies. And you don't only have the what can we say, the scientific and the clinical side of things. You actually also have huge manufacturing capacity in the companies, or not in the company, in the country. So you have that sort of full value chain and full skill set in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So that means that you are able to recruit and if not the people, then at least the competences into your companies. And I think that's very, very useful.
Yeah, and you know, two of the probably best cities to live in the world nearby as well, right? Which doesn't hurt.
Yeah, that's actually fun that you say that, because we portray ourselves like that. But now that over the last year, sort of surfacing these stories about being an expat in Copenhagen,
right?
It's probably not that easy. I mean, it's a lovely city. It's a livable city. It's a city where sort of work-life balance is probably one of the better places to be for that.
Yeah.
But I think we as Danes, and maybe also the Swedes, I'm Danish, as you know, we're probably not the most welcoming people in the world. And we have I just spent some time in London last week, and that sort of popping culture where you go out after work, just spending an hour or two with your colleagues. That doesn't really exist in Denmark. So I think we have a little bit hard to establish long-term friendships in Denmark.
Fair enough.
Anyway,
there are ups and downs.
That shouldn't deter anybody from coming and working here.
No. And I think for a long time, it seems like from the outside, and you'll have a much better view on this than me, that, as you say, there's been a lot of very mature companies in the area for a long time. And particularly the sort of rise of Novo over the last 5-6 years has accelerated that. There was always a very interesting early startup ecosystem, but it seems like, and you know, companies like Alligator are part of this, that there's more of those growing emerging biotech companies now, and that sort of middle ground of the industry is becoming more robust.
Yeah, but I still think that's really where the region has its big challenges. That's sort of that scale-up stage where you really become cash requiring.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a lot of money, a lot of private money for getting you off the ground and getting your phase 1s and maybe also your phase 2s running. But the next step, that's hard to find the money in the Scandinavian ecosystem, and maybe even on a broad scale in Europe. And that's why you see a lot of companies are shifting their focus towards the US in that in that stage of company growth and building.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we see a lot of the same challenges in the UK, for example, and the US is way ahead from a funding point of view of most of us. But yeah, but we're here to talk about you, Søren. I got a bit distracted there. I always like to go back to the beginning. And so you're a biologist by training, Søren.
Yeah.
Very interested from your point of view as to why science for you? Why biology? Why drugs? Why this path, do you think, in the first place?
Yeah, I have to sort of be a little bit humble here. I think sort of it was a little bit sort of settling on the right level. When I started high school, I was pretty certain that I wanted to do math and physics. Okay. That didn't really pan out. I don't know if I didn't have the brain power or the willpower or whatever. That didn't pan out, and sort of biochemistry, biology sort of was probably the right level to sort of land on and sort of school through high school and then getting to university. They didn't admit me to vet school, so it became biology.
we hear that a lot.
You need to sort of find your baseline, and
sure,
yeah. But it was always science, and I can't really tell you why. I mean, I'm the first generation with an academic degree in my family, so it's not really about having a guiding star or somebody pulling me or pushing me in a certain direction, but it was always science.
And that's just where your attention naturally went. You found yourself at the University of Copenhagen, of course, and studying there, and interesting journey to the Pasteur Institute as well.
Yeah, but then then you start and you get in the lab and you realize that you're actually good at something, and you know that from yourself that when you are good at something, then it becomes more interesting, and the better then it just becomes sort of a self-fulfilling, if not a prophecy, then at least some self-feeding cycle. And I did my PhD, and I was lucky enough to be one of the first ones in Denmark to start with a specific fax technique, which sort of made me a small resource center at the faculty. So the co-authorships, they came relatively easy in that period, and I built a nice publication list. And then actually, even before I finalized my PhD, I got this postdoctoral fellowship to move to Paris and work at Pasteur, which is because in the years leading up to that, I met my current wife, and she's a Danish-French translator, and if we wanted to do something together, Paris seemed to be the right place to go.
Yeah.
And I must say that was a change of environment. That was, initially we actually worked at the lab was at the Necker, which is this children's hospital in the middle of Paris, in a professor called Alain Fischer's group. They were doing gene transfers, and they were at the forefront of science. And I would say I was just sort of struck by also at Pasteur, about sort of the utilitarian view, the hard work, the high level of science, and to be honest, I was struggling to keep up. I mean, and that was a good experience coming from your sort of fussy, friendly Danish environment, sort of being okay at top of the hierarchy, even though I was doing my PhD, to an environment where, I mean, the currency was just science. I mean, there was nothing else there, and ending up at the bottom, or starting at the bottom at least, and sort of start learning it all from scratch again. That was really humiliating, and something that I think has been extremely instructive for the rest of my work life, and maybe also personal life. That, I mean, first of all, you cannot take where you are, take that for granted. And sometimes you find yourself in situations where, I mean, you just need to work and you need to believe in your values, in your work ethics, and sort of your general beliefs, and work from there.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think as well, there's a real power in seeing what world class really looks like, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And at that time, and I think Tom, that was also important for me, because I realized, okay, you can never do that.
Right. Okay.
I mean, it was just clear to me that I didn't have the work ethics, I didn't have the sort of the diligence, I didn't have all those things that I could see that the guys in the lab had, and the hours they put in, and I mean that was their sole dedication in life, which I guess is needed at that point in your career if you want to publish in Cell and JXMed and all those nice places. And I just realized that was not for me.
And so is that then, because one of my questions for you was going to be, you quite early in your career moved on to the sort of commercial, the operational side of things. Was that kind of part of the reason for that?
That was part of that. I mean, you could say, I mean, one of my very, very good friends who I mean, he was a year or two ahead of me, but otherwise we did our PhD and postdocs in parallel. He went to the US, but that's another story. I mean, Søren, I mean, he's by the way also called Søren. I mean, he's now a full professor at the university, and you could say, I mean, I could probably have stayed in that track as well. I would probably not have made it that far, but that was the thinking at that point in time. But then, as you say, I got an opportunity to move back to Denmark and take up a research position in Novo Nordisk, doing much more applied research on a very focused project. And I opted to do that. It was clear for me at that point that elite academic career was not for me.
Yes, fair enough. And so you found your way, as you say, back to Novo Nordisk, and set the scene a little bit, because this is kind of 2000, 2001. Novo Nordisk, different company then than it is today, right?
Yeah, very much. I mean, at the now I have to be a little bit careful here if some of my old colleagues listen. No, but it was much more research-driven, much more interest-driven, very focused around insulins, and very, very world-class in insulin there. I got an assignment on starting to work on various type 1 vaccines, so type 1 diabetes of the autoimmune part, using some of my biology experience that I brought with me from my PhD and from my work at Pasteur.
Yes.
It was also sort of pretty successful in terms of finding out pretty quickly that scientifically that worked, but from a industrial point of view, that was probably not the way to go.
Yeah, I see.
I actually think that one of the companies that we worked with have just now, 25 years later, actually put out some phase 3 data on some of the concepts. So, but I mean, and then I also worked a little bit on liraglutide, so the Victoza API, and starting on that. So I was lucky again to position myself sort of in some of the areas where management was sort of shining their lights.
Yeah, I see.
At that period in time.
I see. And you also got involved in the investment side of things.
Yeah, then I think I was still young.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit over eager.
Okay.
And I think what you can do is that you cannot become king in a day, but you can easily become fool in a day. So I think I sort of made a few, when you look back, maybe a little bit, I wouldn't call them immature, but maybe a little bit lofty demands on how I wanted the world to look. And when the company, fair enough, did not sort of give me that straight away, I got this opportunity in setting off the early investment fund in the company, and I opted for that.
Yeah. And it seems like shortly after that, sometimes you find yourself in points in your career or in environments in your career where you can thrive. And it seems like that was the next step for you, going into Symphogen Seems like your career really took off.
Then you know, I mean, and the funny thing is, you can only connect the dots when you're looking back.
Of course, yeah.
So I joined this internal investment arm, and this is not to be mistaken for Novo. I mean, the current. I mean, this was Novo Nordisk internal, so it was not Novo. So what happened there was that we were working on a couple of very exciting investment opportunities, and then around that time, the company had a profit warning.
Okay.
Which meant all the funds that were reserved for investments were sort of withdrawn for 12 months, and then I was sitting there with my salary but nothing to do, and then a good friend of mine that I also knew from my academic PhD work, who was also still a friend, came around and said, "I'm working this company. We actually have this position in open at a director level. I mean, why don't you take a look?" And then I found myself working there.
Yeah.
For
and then
9 years or something. Yes. Yeah, for 9 years or something like that. Yeah.
It's amazing how time gets away, right?
Exactly.
But you took a bit of a different direction during that time, right? And you started getting more involved in the operational side of the company, the mechanics of it all.
You know, it was actually a real fun time. I mean, I think I was number 20 or something joining 23, 25, and the company was at a stage where we were still exploring the science, we were still exploring ways to back to what we were doing, and we were going to do something called an IND.
Yeah.
And, you know, nobody really knew what that was.
Right. Yeah.
And I've heard a little bit about it. I sort of been close to it in Novo, but not really involved. And I think then I just took that baton, and then we got that sorted out. And then, you know, in companies of that size, I mean, the mandate is not something that you get. That's something that you just sort of take. And once you run with it, you are allowed to run with it. And it was extremely direction setting also for my career. A lot of very, very good colleagues that I still see today, good collaborators, and it was just 9 years that 8.5, 9, I can't remember. That sort of went in a whiff, running global projects, raising money, being part of the executive management, doing everything. So I mean, I always say I got my biotech education there, because I mean, if there's a problem, you just solve it.
And what are the things from that time? And I appreciate these things probably all blur together from different roles.
Yeah.
What are the things that have stayed with you, do you think? What are the principles you learned there that you still employ today, do you think?
I think there are many. I think sort of and that is maybe sometimes also in my job today a little bit of a challenge. That, I mean, if there is a problem, I mean, it needs to get solved. You can't just leave it unsolved. Right. And if you see a problem, it's your responsibility. Either you solve it or you hand it over to somebody else. I think that's it. And then I think we another thing that I took with me is that, I mean, hierarchy is good sometimes, but most of the times there needs to be a hierarchy that is hidden. Right. Everybody has to have the feeling of being seen, heard, and understood. And then you need to run your company moving at two different levels, two different domains. What is sort of the reflection domain, where hopefully we can argue our way to the best solution for the company. Of course, we cannot discuss everything in the world, and sometimes we also need to rein things in. And then there is the production domain. That is sometimes there is a hierarchy where somebody decides.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know that from your. I mean, sometimes there are conditions that call for something.
Yeah.
And also when we need to take our decisions that we sort of agreed to on the reflection domain and put them into action, there also need to be a manufacturing hierarchy or production hierarchy where we each have our roles. We're each accountable to each other. We are accountable to the process, so on and so forth. That's one of the things that have taken with me. And then another thing, which I think is actually funny. I mean, I've had when I worked at Novo, I had the immense pleasure to work with both Mads Krogsgaard and especially Peter Kurtzels for many years. So I mean, I think Peter is the father of, I think, 15 or 16 approved products coming out of Novo research. And Peter always said, the less you know about something, the easier it is to get good ideas.
Okay, yeah.
And you can go back to the Symphogen days and said, if we had known what lay ahead of us when we started out and when I just came on board, and 8 years later, I mean, we would have done something else.
Yes, yeah.
So sometimes ignorance is a bliss.
Yeah. There was a podcast interview with Jensen Huang of NVIDIA recently.
Yeah.
And someone said similar to that. They asked him, so if you did this all again, what would you do differently? And he burst out laughing and he just said, do this again. There is no way I would ever do this again.
Exactly. Yeah, but I think also that's also the spirit you have to have in biotech. I mean, it needs to be driven by the vision. It needs to be driven by the willingness to do something for a patient group.
Yes.
Because I mean, if it's anything else that drives you, whether it's personal success or money or what have you, I mean, then go do something else.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it. Yeah.
And I think just going back to your point about hierarchy, I think this is one of the real challenges that biotech companies face as they evolve, right? Is that you shift from this environment where actually you've got to be very creative and innovative and problem solving and autonomous. And it becomes more and more regulated and more the need to control the process becomes more and more as you go along. And I think it's a hard shift.
But I think I don't disagree with that at all. But I think there is we need to. For me, structure is also freedom.
Yeah. Okay.
So when I'm saying that we shouldn't have too much hierarchy, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have structures.
No.
That we shouldn't have the right amount of guidelines and SOPs. But within those structures, if I'm a CEO or some that reports to me are the only one that can make decisions, and the only one that knows what is right, then we won't get anywhere. You need to have that process. And then of course sometimes you also have to say, okay, enough is enough. I mean,
no.
Then I think another thing that I took with me from Symphogen was that I had the opportunity and the fortune to stick my nose into everything.
Yes.
Yeah, and that is of course incredibly helpful also in a job now and in my career between Symphogen and now that you have a sense of what's going on.
Yeah.
Not at an expert level, but you can sort of you have the overview of the things. Yeah.
It's an interesting point, I think. So we talk to people all the time who are making career moves, who are trying to decide sort of what to do with their next few years. And I think there's, especially by scientists, there's an undervaluing of breadth of knowledge, right? And yes, especially early in your career, it's good to be an expert in something because that gives you an advantage. But as we see ongoing demand, especially in more senior positions, for people who understand the whole life cycle, who understand the market, who understand KOLs and things like that. Yeah, it's interesting. And then the next move was an interesting one I wanted to talk to you about, because a lot of people think you shouldn't go back somewhere in your career that you've left, but you did.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So so what happened there? So I spent 9 years at Symphogen. It was great. We did good things. Saw colleagues go, saw colleagues come, and also at a point in time, sort of had my own thinking about what should I do next? Should I try something? And I believe I had a little bit of a blind spot in terms of bigger companies. I mean, I think the fundamental questions it was, am I a biotech guy or can I do more than that?
Right.
And then that sort of became more or less articulated during a period. But then one day in, what was that? 2010, I got a phone call from a guy called Lars Fruergaard Jørgensen, who at that time was heading up corporate development in Novo Nordisk. He's now the president and CEO. Yeah. And Lars asked me whether he had a job that some of my old colleagues thought that might be worth looking at. So Novo had a corporate alliance management function that needed an overhaul, and Lars wanted somebody with an outside-in perspective to come in and do that.
Yeah, interesting.
And I liked the job, and when I met with Lars, we immediately sort of clicked, and it was clear for me that I could learn a lot from him. And I got back and took that job and got that unit up and running within 18 months, and then circled on to the next opportunity within the R&D organization of Novo.
Yeah, and it looks like that went well. It looks like there was lots of interesting things getting involved in there, and you were there for some time.
And I think again back to the philosophy of I mean, if there is something that needs to be fixed, and you fix it and you do it in a respectful way, and you sort of stay within the, what can we say, the defined or undefined boundaries of what you can do in an organization like this. And you, what can you say? Let me put it this way: in a company of 20 people, there's only, I think, 38 feet that you can step on.
Yes, true.
Other than your own. But in a company with 20,000, I mean, so of course, I mean, you shouldn't be rogue, but again, I mean, be sort of engaged, take the challenges that are there, and get moving, and be respectful. And then I think importantly, inform those around you about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and then you'll see that there is a space for you.
Yeah, and it must be very different because obviously you were then in a more senior position than you'd been in last time around, and you had this biotech experience, and suddenly you've got resources to mobilize, not unlimited resources, of course, you've got to argue for them and things, but it's a different type of, it's a different equation then, isn't it?
It is, it was, and I would say I was, you could say in it's also funny because of, I mean, in the beginning, as you said, I had a different perspective. I came from the outside, and maybe I could say and do something that was a little bit orthodox or unorthodox here or there, not too much, but it was sort of accepted. And you can say when you've been the same place, then in 5, 6, 7 years, then sort of the outside in. I mean, you need to conform more. Do you understand?
Right.
Yeah. So of course that balance also changes. You can't preserve that sort of outside in perspective, sort of let him do it. He doesn't know what he. So of course that role changes.
Yeah, of course. No, that's a good point.
But the point about if there is something that needs to be done and you do it, I mean, it's very rare that people will criticize you for solving issues.
Very true. So you're going along nicely. You've got your nice corporate job. You've got your
Yeah,
corporate VP title. You're doing nice work. It's all interesting. You've become a little bit more institutionalized 8 years in, but
absolutely. Yeah.
still going well. Was there just a biotech itch that was still there that you had to go back and scratch, or what?
No, 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 no. I think you also have to realize that even big companies, they change direction, they
Yeah.
change people, they change roles, and there is a lot. I mean, I have colleagues that have been in Novo for 30 years, and they have maybe had 10, 15 different jobs.
Yes.
And so that's also part of it, and there just came a time where where I wanted to go and where the company wanted me to go was not immediately concurrent, and then over a period of a year it maybe changed to a point where we said, okay, we want you to do this, you don't want to do it, maybe it's time we part our ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was, when I look back at it, it was completely uncontroversial. I mean, nothing there. Of course, when you then shut the front door.
Yes.
And your email traffic goes from 200 mails a day to zip.
Yes.
Then, of course, reality strikes in a way. And I mean, I think that's also, and that's again back to the Pasteur experience. I mean, then you need to go back and say, okay, even I felt that I was some part of control or in some kind of control of this process. I mean, the result is still now I need to do something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you need to get back to those fundamentals about what is it that I can do? What is my work ethics? Who am I? How do I interact with other people? How do I create value? All those things that you, during your Monday to Friday 9 to 19 operations, you maybe don't think or reflect so much about. So for me, it was an opportunity to reset in a way and say, okay,
yeah.
What is it? I mean, now you just go with the flow, and I can tell you, Novo Nordisk in that sense is a fantastic workplace, and there is a team spirit, and there is a vision, and there is an intent in what you're doing, and that was one of the very important things that I learned there as well. But you also get a little bit colorblind. I mean, everything becomes blue. You also get a little bit speed blind. Everything is fast, and you just follow the flow. So it was a good reset. Yeah.
And like you say, you don't often get the opportunity to do that. And I think we've seen a lot of people over the last 18 months that have been subject to downsizing, restructuring, that kind of stuff. Obviously, for some people, those are more challenging personal situations than others. But like you say, it forces you into that thinking about, what do I really want? What actually, where do I thrive? What do I enjoy? So that's led you back into biotech. And of course, I'm going to fast forward a little bit here, just in the interest of time. So there was some advisory work, which led to an executive role. You then eventually stepped into your first CEO role, Alligator being your second, of course. One of the things I'm always interested in when I speak to people who've been multiple time CEOs is it's always a different role the first time around, right? You'd been a CBO, you'd been a COO, you'd been in executive positions, but being at the top is different. What do you think were maybe one or two of the things that you learned the first time around that have been helpful the second time around?
I mean, the first thing, and this is something that we tell each other, I guess, as a cliche, that it's, at least in the Danish language, that it's cold on the top.
Yeah.
It's not particularly cold, it's just bloody lonesome.
Yeah.
And I think that was number one, learning. When you work in a larger company, or even at a biotech company, you always have peers.
Yes.
that you can talk to. You can maybe involve people a little bit of sort of one step below, but when you're the CEO, there is no peers.
Yep.
So how do you create that space where you have a dialogue with your colleagues in management at the right sufficient level, and how do you create the right relationship to the chairman?
Yes.
Right, that is number one. I mean, that defines a lot about how you can work your how you can work in your role as CEO. So that is number one, getting that defined.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I have always been living by is that, I mean, you need to be transparent. I mean, you don't wanna sort of show all your problems. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. But you also don't want things to blow up, and you don't want your chairman or your boss or whatever to be surprised about something that happens. Especially not if you had a couple of weeks forewarning.
Yes.
So be transparent on how things are developing, and then try to be a part of the solution for those.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I also think your point about the not having peers is a really important one. And I guess the way that I see that, and you may disagree with this, is that transparency, absolutely. But in that CEO role, I think you're always thinking about, what does that other person need to hear from me? What do they need to receive, rather than what do I need to tell them? It's what do they need from me, right? Whether that's upwards or down to your team or whatever. And so I think there's constantly that good intention filtering, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then I think you will always know more of the truth than anybody around you, and that's number one. And then I think one of the things that also became clear to me, and I think this was just a reinforcement of what I think I realized after leaving Novo Nordisk, is that the job is never yours. I mean, you're just in it for a period of time.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, meaning that one day you can do it really, really good. Then somebody will probably come and knock on your door and say, we need somebody now that is the commercial expert, or you can do a bad job. Somebody will knock on your door one day. I mean, the only thing you can do, and I think that sort of goes with any job, is that you can only do it to the best of your abilities. And doing it good to your best of your abilities in your current job is always going to be your segue to the next job. That's just how we. And then I think, Tom, one of the things that maybe it's clear for others, but one of the things that I realized in my first job, I mean, you need to be a little bit careful about how you sort of judge yourself. Are you making the right decisions with a good outcome? Are you making the right decisions with a bad outcome? Are you making bad decisions with a good outcome? And try to sort of isolate the outcome from the decision.
Okay.
I mean, you are taking so many decisions here, and so many, even though you try to push as many, and you always should push as many decisions down to the right level in the organization to be taken there, you of course take a lot of decisions. Some of them you take sort of with the slow part of your brain, and a lot of them you just take as knee-jerk reactions. And you need to, I think you need to do yourself the favor of analyzing your decision-making a little bit as a CEO, or in any other job, actually.
In regards to, are you getting the outcome that you want, you mean?
Yeah, and also sometimes you are making bad decisions, but you get a good outcome. I mean, don't fool yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So did this happen because of the decision I made, or did this just happen?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Yeah. So we've covered a lot here. Tell me about what you can about what's next for Alligator, where you guys are going. What we talked about, where you are. What's the year ahead hold?
I mean, we at Alligator right now we have one overarching priority. We have mitazalimab, as I said. We've done the phase 2. We have cleared all the regulatory meetings associated with an end of phase 2 program, both in Europe and in the US. We have manufactured phase 3 material. We had a hope that we could raise enough cash to at least push the drug into phase 3. I don't think that's very realistic.
Okay.
Unfortunately, so we are in the process of identifying a suitable partner for the molecule. That is very much of what the first part of this year is going to be focused around. And I think that's another thing that, even though in whatever job you have, you asked me what I've learned from my first CEO job, and that is, I mean, you are a salesman.
Yes,
you are a salesman number one in the company. I mean,
yes,
and you might have been in positions to sell your ideas or projects and what have you in whatever pharma organization you worked in, but here you are the salesman.
Absolutely.
And money is needed.
Yeah.
There is no evergreen perpetual cash flow that will help finance your department next year. I mean, you need to raise cash.
No, absolutely. And I think, as you say, the further you go in your career, the more that becomes the case, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Fab. Well, Søren, it's been fantastic to speak to you. I feel like we've done a bit of a whistle-stop tour. There's so much more I could have asked you about. But it's been great to dive into. And thank you for joining us.
Absolutely, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe and share it with someone else you think will benefit. And for more podcasts, videos, blogs, and insights, come follow me, Tom Froggatt, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Medium, or TikTok. See you next time.